It is a joy and a privilege to present to you someone who's inspired me in my priesthood as our keynote speaker, Professor Helen Alvaré.
I'm way shorter here. Thank you so much, Father Bob, and to the bishop, and to all of you here. Thank you so much for coming on a Saturday night when there's so much Netflix that you could be doing instead, etc. With regard to Villanova, I must say, I met my husband there when I was 17, so whatever else I would say about it, I got my husband out of it. And when I graduated there, we decided to get married in the chapel there with the priest who had been the guy at campus ministry, very cool guy, Sean Tracy, may he rest in peace. Anyway, the day we got married, they won, this was in 1985, they won the semifinals of the NCAA. And when we came out of our church on the campus, there were like biplanes buzzing the steeple and students, and we have pictures of our receiving line with students pouring through them. So, and last year when Villanova won, I was in the middle of North Capitol. I had just done this huge C-SPAN special on cases of history. And I got out on North Cap and I heard Villanova play, and I was adjusting the radio, and a cop comes up behind me, and I'm like, oh, hello. And like, I wasn't holding my phone. I don't know what. He goes, you're sitting in the middle of North Cap. Get out of here. And I was just trying to hear the game. And I had just stopped my car in the middle of traffic. So, yes, I am proud of Villanova. And it is delightful to be here in Arlington. My husband was born and raised in Maryland. That's why we live there. But just so you know, I'd rather live here. And I have so many of my best buddies here. And I feel like we're all grown up now. I mean, we were practically, children when we met. Amy McInerney at the Diocese in Respect Life, Therese Bernpohl at the Diocese in Marriage and Family Life. My gosh, my friend Kelly McGinn is actually running for the House of Delegates. I'm like, how could we be so grown up and actually running for office and doing stuff like that now in this area? But we are. And it's a delight to be among you. These are some of my very closest friends. So thank you again for having me. I'm going to give you a little intro and roadmap here because I am a law professor and roadmaps are important. First telling you, why am I here speaking about this? Yes, I do have a degree in theology, but I'm an academic, law professor, with obviously Catholic, if that wasn't clear, with a background in law and theology. But I think more importantly for this talk is to say that I'm a Catholic wife, mother, of quite diverse children. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm an employee, I'm a colleague, I'm a neighbor, I'm a boss, I'm a citizen. And Catholic social teaching for me has been a way of better accounting for and prescribing for the reality that faces me in my everyday life, better than any other system of thought I have ever encountered. And by prescribing for and accounting for and giving me a way to face, I mean, it's a way that gives me not only more meaning and frankly more happiness, and not just of the sort of, ooh, I won $20 on the lotto happiness, but deeper happiness that lasts, and a sense that I am more free. Even when I'm sad, even when things have gone badly, it is a sense that a life lived in accord with Catholic social teaching makes me feel free. This is a huge topic, and I don't want to bore you by going too far in one or another direction. One direction is, do good and avoid evil in connection with all of those people you encounter. Okay, we're done. And the other direction is, here's all the encyclicals that have dealt with it, and allow me to quote from them in Latin and then translate. We're not going to be doing either of that. I am, however, going to be drawing on these encyclicals that the Church has, obviously. I am also going to be drawing on scholarship and popular discussion of it, books, etc. But as you can imagine, I can only do so much in the time allotted. So what I am going to do is first discuss the current ascendancy, particularly of the theme, and Catholic social teaching has got so much great stuff in it, but the theme that Pope Francis has highlighted for us, which is a throwaway culture. And I want to talk about how that theme has come into an ascendancy. Then I want to talk about issues that are current in the U.S. Then I want to talk about the background of Catholic social teaching on dignity. Then some very particular issues that are current in the U.S. right now, where we see human dignity denied or compromised, and how we should specially seek to reference and realize it. Fourth, I want to talk about some really practical hurdles to this, right? We're all parishioners of different parishes, and that's the kind of conversations we have with one another about our lives and how these big ideas of the church are being worked out in our lives. So I want to talk about some practical ideas and some practical hurdles at the very end, okay? So first, I'm going to start with the ascendancy of the message of a throwaway culture. Pope Francis uses this language a lot. It has attained common currency, by which I mean, you know, when he says something and it gets quoted in like the Atlantic Monthly or the New York Times, or it just gets talked about, you know, in a lot of parishes and at a lot of conferences, you know that it has struck a chord. Some of you aren't old enough to remember, some of you are, when John Paul II made reference to a culture of death. That stuff hit major newspapers. The Washington Post was using it in editorials. When Pope Benedict talked about a dictatorship of relativism, likewise. When a diagnosis has been made of a period of history by a person who has both reason and revelation at their disposal, as our beautiful popes do, then it's not surprising that it comes from inside our church, reaches outside our church, and touches the population at large, okay? Pope Francis, while he says a lot of things that obviously overlap with themes of prior popes, and speaking about threats to human life, a consumerist lifestyle, he has some particular issues that he highlights, often under the heading of integral ecology, which was a great theme of at least two of his encyclicals. He has highlighted the question of immigration and refugees, okay, very much so, brought this to the fore. He has also highlighted, and how many of us have had deep experience with this, issues of unemployment and people feeling hopeless because of unemployment. Remember how much he talked about that? During that time of the recession, I mean, it hit my own family quite hard, and it hit so many people I knew, but I also had the chance to travel in Spain, where they had a 40% unemployment rate among young people and a 25% employment rate among the population at large, 1 out of 4. And you talk to people and you really saw what it meant to lose work, you know, the ability to work and to provide for your family. It was interesting, I'll just tell you an aside, when there was the conclave that elected Pope Francis, the Wall Street Journal asked 10 Catholic Americans to write, what does the next pope need to be? And I forget, they asked me to give it a pithy headline, and I tried. Anyway, I was crazy as could be, and I stayed up all night, like most of 2 nights, you know, because writing like 500 words is harder than writing 10,000. And I wanted it to be pithy, and what I said is, we really do need someone to lift up the issues of poverty and immigration, which are really crescendoing right now. And they, in the end, they go, Peggy Noonan wrote a better one, so we're not publishing yours. And I like killed myself on it, and I nailed it. And I was like, I went to the guy who dinged it, and I was like, I nailed it, you missed it. You know, I had the chance to be prophetic. But he definitely is a voice for the times on those issues. The other issues that he addresses a lot are consumerism and the environment, and obviously a lot of these things are related. John Paul II did some really great stuff on consumerism as well in Laborem Exercens and Solicitude Rei Socialis in particular. But this is very much a message for the United States, many countries, but we definitely have one of the bigger habits to kick among countries in the world on consumerism, and so that's something worth paying a lot of attention to. Let me now go through and sort of do the meat of the presentation, which is some of the beautiful material out of Catholic social teaching, and I'm trying to put it in a way that is not a recitation of the compendium on Catholic social teaching or the encyclicals, but I have tried to put it in a more, colloquial way so that we can not be so bored. So let me note first about Catholic social teaching on dignity that it is neither right-wing nor left. There is something in Catholic social teaching to prick the conscience of every human being who thinks about their own life and the lives of their communities. Throughout history, human dignity is a peg that sticks out and absolutely refuses to be pounded flat. It's helped keep a focus on truths that you can figure out with reason about the essential qualities and needs and desires of the human person and human communities. The language of dignity is all over United Nations documents. It's gotten very popular today to the fact where, and this is controversial, but I'm going to say it, that if you say something that offends somebody even a little, they'll say, you've affronted my dignity and you should be shut up. It's called dignity creep. You know, you've heard of human rights creep, where you call everything a human right. Well, the idea that we cannot respectfully disagree, you know, that love for the person, but saying, but I don't agree with your opinion, without being deplatformed or told that we should be sued for a violation of dignity, there's a little bit of a problematic use of it. But please do not let that take the gravitas for any of us out of the true importance of the actual meat of Catholic social teaching, or just natural reason on the dignity of every person. In Catholic social teaching, we usually hear this first prong of Catholic social teaching, human dignity, referred to as life and dignity of the human person, okay? And just by the way, because you're going to see me weave them in a bit, the second and third major prongs of Catholic social teaching are often summarized as subsidiarity and solidarity. Subsidiarity meaning allowing matters to be handled by the smallest local groups first, and allowing the creative person who is made in the image of God to use that creativity, to use their gifts, to solve things at the small group before, if they are incapable, we move to the next larger group, and so forth, okay? And it's interesting because I'm going to say this a couple times throughout, because I think Catholic social teaching overwhelms people because of the many demands that it necessarily makes. But this focus on beginning with the small community that you're in, the subsidiarity, it's worth way more than you might think, because one of the dangers of the practical dangers of Catholic social teaching is being overwhelmed by its many pieces and many demands and saying, well, I can't do any of it. But here I want to put in front of you that the Good Samaritan story is actually a big relief, because it's a limiting principle, by which I mean the Good Samaritan story didn't say, go out and save the world, all of you. Just run out of your houses and save the world. It said, who is your neighbor? Who are the people who are strewn in your path? And so if someone is in your path, you're on. You perform. It's your job. So, but, you know, what we don't want to be is like that old cartoon about this, you know, Snoopy, the Peanuts cartoon, which is, I love humanity, it's people I hate. Remember that? The subsidiarity principle says you start local. You start with the people who are given you. And right away, you know if they're in need, you're on. That's actually a bit comforting. There's a lot of people, but we've all lived some years. You're not usually just getting, you know, rained on with that kind of demands. I'm in the middle of some turmoil now, an extended family, and the people who are close to me, who are having masses said, who are calling, who are just checking in with me, that's where we start, right? The next principle is solidarity. Solidarity flows from the idea that people are intrinsically social. I'll talk about that a little more. We are actually in need of society to actually be who we are. Your nature, as communally oriented, is as true of you as your free will and your reason. You know, we talk about image and likeness of God, and we're all like, oh, yeah, it means I have free will and reason. Well, it also means, like the Trinity, you were born to be in relationship. And you can't actually be yourself as you were called to be. You're not actually facing reality of your human anthropology unless you are in relationship, okay? So now let me unpack dignity. I've talked a little bit about subsidiarity and solidarity just because you're going to see them, they're all interlaced. But let me unpack dignity as an aspect of Catholic social teaching. You will see right away when I talk about it why it is so certain that the Church's general theological teachings on this would lead us to the positions that we take as private-to-private relationships, the positions we take on legislation and public policy. They lead to it, okay? So the theological foundations of human dignity, I think I could put any one of you up behind a microphone and you could say this as easily as I could. It begins with God creating and willing each of us, making each of us in his image and likeness, loving each of us, inviting each of us into a personal relationship, gifting each of us with these amazing things that not all creatures have of reason and free will, gifting each of us with a community. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but God could have babies come into the world any way he wanted. He could have made new humans. He could send them out one at a time from his own hand. We could have grown them in the fields. We could have made them in the labs, right? We could have had men produce them, all by themselves, or women. The fact that it happens with the twosome, the fact that it is associated with human love and commitment, the fact that children need that adult's commitment to be with them, to capacitate them to be who they are for so long, the fact that when you marry him, then you have these extended family that are also in relationship to one another. I don't think that's an accident, right? I think that tells us something. And you learn more from distinction than description. Just saying, yeah, I got a mother and a father, it's kind of moving, but it's not as moving as it is when you realize that God could have produced you otherwise. And that he gifts each of us, again, in addition to these great qualities that we have that just you recognize as amazing, he gifts us with our communal nature. And people experience this knowing God's love for them and the gifts they have. I think of the fabulous story of Sister Josephine Bakhita, who went from slavery to becoming a sister on this stunning understanding that she was a slave, but that somebody loved her equally and it was God, as loved everybody else, and that this gave her a dignity that she was then absolutely confident of. You hear about Bonhoeffer, who one of the things he was most struck with was God's personal love for him, which is almost too overwhelming to contemplate if you ever, go away on a retreat and do that. First you'll sleep for the first 2 days, right? And then you'll just cry when you realize this. And this is the origin of our dignity. Also, a theological foundation for our dignity is connected to God calling each of us to the same eternal destiny. All right? We are all called to the same marvelous eternal life. Also, and we say this all the time, but we don't think about it much, God's taking on human personhood and suffering and dying for our benefit, identifying himself with us, involving himself with us, okay? Again, distinction helps me more than description here. If anybody's ever read Pope Benedict's Introduction to Christianity, and he says, listen, let's just get a kind of grasp here on what kind of God we have. And then he contrasts it with the gods of history up until that point. And he goes, we could have had a God who was just to be feared. We could have had a God who just wanted sacrifices and held in awe. We could have had arbitrary gods, like the Roman gods. They're going to swoop down, take one of your women, take them back to wherever. They're going to have kids. That kid's going to marry another god. They're going to get drunk at parties. Absolutely arbitrary gods who were powerful, but also did things that you didn't admire. Yeah, they were involved in human affairs, but we're not sure we liked it, okay? Gods about whom it's difficult to have feelings, to love. I just think about the readings we had tonight about, God showing mercy, and God speaks to Moses and said, your people are this, I'm going to come and I'm going to save you. Just contrast that with the other kinds of gods in history, and you realize that he came to be with us. Every once in a while, I was at Stations of the Cross, which I love because it's quiet, meditative, really cool. Great way to start your Friday night. And somehow the one of Jesus when he's laying down on the cross and they're about just got to me because there he is and he's a man on the ground. And it was a very good carving of it that we have at my church. And, there he is. He's on the ground. He's a man on the ground. And it just moved me so much that he is among us and that there he is, at someone else's hands being abused. I don't know how many of you love Luigi Giussani or even know about him. He's the founder of Communion and Liberation Movement. But in his book, At the Origin of the Christian Claim, Why Do We Say Jesus Is the One? He has these marvelous, that he does these personal descriptions of gospel passages. And he talks about the moment, when the Gospel of John, when I think it's John and Andrew who meet Peter when John the Baptist says, or they meet Jesus when John the Baptist says, oh, there he is, and I'm not fit to tie his sandals. And they go over and they spend time with him. And it's even written in kind of a disjointed way. And I think he's the one. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, kind of like a disjointed storytelling because they were so blown away by him. And then they live with him and they say to themselves, as Giussani sort of does this in a spiritual writing, how is a guy who can confound the Pharisees, weep with the widow who has lost her last protection in society, command nature naturally and without a lot of fanfare, and loves us and knows us? How can this be? They're just blown away by, he's human, he's with them, and he is doing all this for them. And he's everything you'd want someone to be. He tells the story, Giussani does, of when Mary Magdalene is at the tombstone, and she thinks it's the gardener, which struck me from tonight's reading. It's the gardener who amends the fig tree, right? It's the gardener who goes in and turns the soil, right? She thinks he's the gardener. And she doesn't recognize him, and all he has to do is look at her because he knows her like nobody else. And he says, Mary. Why? That's so much more than just her name. This is a man who knows us like no one knows us. He knows us really. He knows us with a love like nobody else. If this is not a seriously awesome foundation for our dignity, that God knows each of us, I don't know what is. I would add that we are, I think, given to know this by what some people would call natural reason. I think it's also common sense. When we encounter another person, sure, you're like, oh, you can walk and talk, you're sweet, you have a nice smile, you're using reason, you're whatever. But if you really stop and think about it, there are times in every one of our lives when we have encountered somebody and they just move us. I was having an encounter with a son that I was none too pleased about at the moment, and I will not specify whether it was the son or the encounter. And I was really very sad, unhappy. And he was explaining things to me, and I began to look at his hands. And I never noticed it before. He's in his 20s, that he has my exact hands. And I just started to cry because I thought, how can I be so angry at this boy who has these young hands? They're mine. And I was so angry. But there he is using these human hands, and they're mine, and he's mine. So sometimes it just blows you away. I was on the train the other day, and I was going through Philly. I'm from Philly. I wish I could have gotten off, but I had to come back. I was coming back from New York, and and a boy gets on. 13-year-old kid, African-American kid, and he looked at me almost fearfully. I had one of the last empty seats, and my heart, again, it just like dropped. I thought, why are you looking at me fearfully? Is it because I'm older? Is it because I'm white? Is it because, what is it? And so I can he sit there? And I looked up and I said, hey, I got a seat here. And he sat down and he was quiet and I'm not. And so, and I said, so you got on at Philly. What are you doing there? And he started to tell me about this military academy he went to, and his mother sent him there, and he was having trouble with his mother. And I said, oh, I used to waitress at a diner in that town, and I used to serve all the boys from that military academy, and I know it's hard, and this and that. Anyway, we got talking, and then he started to cry, and then I started to cry because he was so sad about his school. And then he went to play his game for a while, and then before he left, he just squeezed my arm and said, oh, thanks, and he walked off. And then I started to cry again. I'm at that time of life. I'm 58. Can 58-year-olds relate? I just cry over everything. But it seems to me that we are given to know by these encounters with people that make us laugh, they make us cry, they make us ecstatic about loving them. But we are given to know this dignity of other people in these encounters. And we should stop and we should take note of them. You know how they flit off. You see something beautiful. You know, your husband does something sweet, your mother, your mother-in-law, a friend, and just, it's gone. Don't let it be gone. It has to be a stop and reflection. From this human identity, who we really are, okay? You're not, you know, an IT guy from Falls Church who goes to such and such a parish and is married to so-and-so. At your core, deeper than that, more real than all those things, is your status as a loved creature of God who has been placed into the relationships that you've been placed in. And then we reason from this, because of what I just described, we are. Now you know what we owe one another. Now that you know who you are and who everybody else is, now you know what you owe. First of all, we're physically fragile. We're pretty fragile people. Lots of terrible accidents, lots of illnesses, lots of just mistakes, right, that we make, we fall. I remember when my husband was unemployed at one point, I remember thinking, I can't fall down a set of steps because I need to go to work, right? I'm always in such a hurry that I fall down steps and up steps, lots. It's just, I'm always going, and I was like, Helen, your fragile human body, stop running up and down steps. It changed me. I'm better on steps now. But we know that we're all fragile, and so we owe one another a certain amount of physical care. And everybody has to have, and this is, you've heard the universal destination of goods as part of Catholic social teaching. The earth is made for all of us. Everybody has to have what human beings as physical beings need: food, clothing, shelter from the elements, health, okay? So we must provide for one another, solidarity, beginning with the areas that we're in, subsidiarity. And when we cannot, this is where we say that the larger community, the state, has to come in. The state has to support people in their human dignity. We cannot let people fall through a floor, okay? And while it might be less obvious to us than our needs from our physical being, we are also intellectual beings, emotional beings, spiritual beings. If we contemplate this, which means looking at Scripture, looking at tradition, looking at reason, we know that human beings also need things like, we are entitled to an education, right? Know-how, intellectual development, opportunities to be asked to fashion solutions to problems, okay? We need work which engages our mind and our reason, if at all possible. Human beings are very sad when they do not get invited to give their gifts, okay? They have to be invited to give their gifts, okay? There's a formula that I love to steal. He's an Australian guy. I think he's in Australia back there. He was teaching at Catholic U for a while, but I've lost track of him. His name is Father Brian Johnstone. And he wrote a white paper that I'm not even sure it's ever been turned into a published article on human beings' essential nature as gifted givers who have to, we are made, as I said, communal. We are also made with all these gifts. And in order to be ourselves, we have to be asked to give them. We have to be asked to give them. And when we give gifts to other people, they are gifts that capacitate others to be what they are. So educators are gifting that. Parents are gifting that. Friends are gifting that. You are capacitating your friends, your students, your colleagues to be gifted givers themselves. And I'll just give you a contrary example. So when my daughter says, I want to be a princess for Halloween, and I love to sew, and I'm making this complicated costume with the peaked thing and the silver and crisscross bodice here, it cost me a fortune, took forever. And the night before, she goes, I hate pink. Now, what I want to say is, I did this for you. You wanted to be a princess. I am giving this gift to you. Am I capacitating her to be a gifted giver? Is that really worth the, I am giving you this gift, shut up and put it on? I mean, that's just a very basic example. Or, and I only learned this because the same thing happened to my sister. She wanted to be Shaggy from Scooby. And my first thought was, so, you want to be ugly? Okay, fine. But I didn't say that. And my sister had the same thing happen, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to freak out about the princess costume, right? The point is to enjoy Halloween, right? The point is, set it aside and gift her with something that says, Mommy doesn't freak out about this sort of thing, and you shouldn't either, right? Anyway, I use this theory about people as gifted givers. I did this law review article, which I'm running out of time, I don't have time to bore you with, but I wanted to know why almost all the government programs trying to help poor single moms, right, to wait to have children until after they were married. And I did all the qualitative and quantitative literature, in particular the most beautiful study ever written called Promises I Can Keep, Why Poor Women Put Motherhood Before Marriage. And after 18 months spent reading the psychological, the economic, the sociological, and the legal literature on it, what you found is that they said, well, there weren't a lot of opportunities to take care of other people in my community, but this was one. And instead, all the government programs are saying, listen, honey, we can give you this amount of birth control, this amount of training in your budget, life skills. Don't worry, we'll get you into college. We'll get you out of here. It was all about me, 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 me. We are going to make you a self-maximizing monad. Here you go. And the girls were saying, well, what if I wanted to, give the gift of something else? What if I wanted that, and I'm not really sure that I'm cut out for this other thing, and I'm not sure that I can really see it. I can't envision it. And the ones who wanted to give a gift to love and take care of someone wanted to have that child, right? And the government programs never speak to that. And it just turned out that I did an examination of all the government programs, and it was only the ones that did speak to that had 70 hours of community service where these young women gave to others, where they actually had a reduction in teen pregnancy. Very interesting principle. And Catholic social teaching applied, on the ground. Anyway, from these qualities of human beings as we come from the hand of God, you can deduce what we owe to one another, and also what we are owed by the larger units, township, state, nation, etc. So this is why the Church takes the positions that it does when it recommends laws, benefits, policies which touch on matters, everything from the sacredness of human life to social welfare benefits, to healthcare, education, labor, employment, immigration, all these issues. It flows from these basic truths about who we really are. And may I take a moment here in this Beltway area, which I am also under the bubble, to note how much more informative and useful it is to start, as Catholic social teaching does, with a reasonable and theological grasp of human dignity, to really know our identity as creatures loved and fashioned by God, to then figure out what we owe one another and what we are owed by larger social units, versus starting with some political party's platform and going, oh, that's the ticket. That's a perfect summary of everything of how we should treat people. It could never be enough. You actually start from who people are, not what a political party has negotiated in either some back room or even in front of a microphone. Speaking of what is owed by the state, Catholic social teaching also teaches that human dignity, while it, may be easily recognized in others, is not given by others. It is given to you by the hand of God itself. Our job is to recognize, respect, and do what we can when it's not being satisfied, to assist, to promote, to make recompense, right? Okay, to do honor to people as they are dignified. Now, let me highlight a few issues, then talk about a few hurdles. The few issues, they're also huge. But on the question of immigration, for instance, when you really think about human dignity, and you think about so much of the tone of news reporting on this, which is how many people can we find who have recently immigrated, who have done something terrible so we can slam them? That's the tone of so much of the newscast. How can we say that a recent immigrant has done something problematic, right? As opposed to, why are people coming? What's the situation in their home country? How could we be as generous as possible while still being orderly and law-abiding, right? If you see the person first, my son pointed this out to me. He's an economist in training, and he works for a big international development firm that does a variety of anti-poverty programs. And he was pointing out to me, he showed me a speech, and I said, is that an anti-immigration speech? He goes, no, it was the speech made to keep women out of the labor market when they started pouring in the 1970s because, they're going to ruin the economy. They're going to have too many people in the labor market. We really have to keep them out because we can't take that kind of shock to the market. And then the economist later in the speech says, is that really the question? He says, that is the framework in which we are asking the question about immigration today. And he goes, would we say we can't have women in the market because it would be too much of a shakeup? And he says, can't we ask the question differently? What would it take to bring women into the marketplace if they really want to come, if they have all these gifts to give, and how would we work that? Wouldn't that be sort of the human dignity question? It was just a really interesting little exercise. Of course, the question of the poor is always with us. So few political pronouncements are actually directed at the poor or for the poor. There is a lot said about the middle class, fine, we're people too, but there is very little actually said about lifting up the poor in a real way. And I'm just gonna say here, because it's my area, that I write a great amount about the family. And one of the most, to me, it's one of the civil rights issues of our time, is how poor Americans do not have the blessings and benefits of marriage, marital parenting, stable family life. They have the highest rates of non-marital birth, the highest rates of cohabitation, the highest rates of divorce, the lowest rates of marriage, the highest rates of abortion. I could go on. And their family lives, which require obviously economic and educational policies, but family structure is the single biggest factor in the gap between the rich and the poor in the United States now. It's the single biggest factor. It's not race, it's family structure, because it is closely nested with one's educational opportunities, social capital, relatives who get you jobs, summer jobs. One relative can take over when the other one has had it with you. So I just would say, when it comes to the poor, I wrote a book last year called Putting Children's Interests First in American Family Law and Policy, and it's really a lot about the question of the poor and their right to have stable family lives. So I just highlight that. Racism, right? We're talking about it as a country in a huge way. Again, imagine if we began with marveling about the dignity of everyone, no matter, color, ethnic origin, et cetera. Imagine if that was our starting place on the question of race. And it won't answer all the tiny little policy questions that are being brought up today, but it is a huge and beautiful teaching that the church has to bridge gaps or to simmer down fights. Of course, the issues of the environment, what people are owed in terms of a healthy place to live. Pope Francis talks about this a lot in connection with consumerism and its effects on the environment. And obviously the question of sacredness of life before birth, when people have disabilities, illness, at or near death. Obviously, all of these too fall under human dignity. And it's so funny because when you're really young, you don't imagine how you're going to relate to people who are dying, who have a terminal illness, or people who, I grew up with a sister who was profoundly disabled. She passed away a few years ago. But then you just figure, oh no, you learn. You start with the other human being in the room. It's like a kid. You know how you thought you had to entertain your kids like crazy when actually Mr. Finger would really do the job for like the first 4 years? The same thing is true when people have illnesses and suffering or near death. You just start by being there, and it's very little that's actually required except to love them and want to serve what they need, right? And again, a perspective of human dignity is what gets you there. Okay, I'm going to now try to conclude in 2 minutes so I don't panic Father Bob and anyone else. Of course, I want to talk a little bit about moving from church teaching to practice. And again, keeping in mind the memory of not only individual moments when we are so moved by the dignity of another person, but also Jesus's. That this man, who's so smart, who's also so humble, who is so powerful, who is also so compassionate and not arrogant. One of my favorite, I love the story of Mary Magdalene. I love the story of Jesus taking the trouble to care about the widow who had lost her last line of protection, right? She had lost her husband, now she's going to lose, her son was dead, and he gives her back her son. this is what we're talking about when we're talking about putting it into practice. What are the hurdles? I think distraction, lack of focus or prioritizing, time. I'm so in a hurry all the time, and I have so many deadlines. I literally, and this is not any credit to me, I literally have to sometimes get up and say, okay, Helen, people first today. Kidding. It's like, because otherwise it would be like writing first, another deadline first, finish some project around the house first, and I have to go, come on, Helen, people first. My husband says I should mutter that while I'm driving too, so stay away. I'm just, he wanted to get me a sticker. You've seen them, they say safety third. Have you seen that? It's that people first, safety third are really. So one of the things is you actually have to build in time. You cannot fill your life with so many must-dos that you're leaving people out, or you're doing something wrong. You could, you're also, how should I spend my time? Should I do this or that? If you've got your life so packed that when someone says, I need you to drive me to chemo, you have to say no, something's off, right? You just know. I remember when I was asked by the White House to go to John Paul II's funeral as a representative of the U.S. And I remember being silent on the phone thinking, I said, my daughter has a recital that day. And the guy from the White House is like, what did you say? And I'm like, my daughter has a recital that day. I can't go. And he's like, no, come on, she's going to have others. And I'm like, you don't get it. He was like 29. Said, you don't get it. So I had to say no. And then 2 weeks later, they called me and asked me to be a delegate to Pope Benedict's inauguration. So it was great. You don't usually get payback that swiftly by doing the right thing. But I now literally will put in my calendar, I'll just put empty hours so that I have not scheduled other people out. That's the only way I can think about it. Just say, oh no, this weekend I'm just leaving in case somebody calls. Or if people call and it's not that weekend, I'll have that weekend to make up that article that I'm supposed to write. I'm literally sticking it in my calendar now. Materialism is another factor that I think frightens people. How much will I be required to give up? And I don't know, for me, just sort of, doing it. I'm not going to go to heaven for it because I'm doing it, not always happily, giving away more than I want to. But just getting in the habit of it. And then also remembering that the Good Samaritan story has kind of a limiting principle in it. You're not expected to give away everything you need to live or what you need to take care of your family, et cetera. You are meant to give sacrificially. You are meant to give regularly. And you are meant to, not only money, but time, and sort of actually build it into your ordinary budget and calendar, okay? My final thought is, to break out of the culture wars ideology thing we have going on here in Washington. I've cut back on news. I am doing more spiritual reading and scripture every day as a way of, and then whatever happens during the day, of seeing it through the lens of that scripture. I also spend a fair amount of time reading ideas I cannot tolerate so that I can learn about them and so that I can think about what's true in them. And so I read a very wide variety of things and have conversations on a very wide variety of subjects in order to see truth where it lies and be reasonable about that it may lie in a variety of places, okay? So that's it. The good news is that with every time that we mess up, we have another chance. When I, as I say, fall off the nice wagon, I always have a shot to get back on, right? God, just like I love tonight's gospel, that, we are often really barren fruit trees, but you can amend the soil. God gives us the strength to ask him to come and do it. He will come and do it. You have to be patient. But there is always a possibility for improving our treatment of other people in light of Catholic social teaching. So thank you very much, and I'm going to stop now.